Welcome back to Rising. Lindsay, what's in your lens today?
Let's talk about it. So, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem went on CNN to defend the actions of ICE agent Jonathan Ross, who shot and killed Renee Nicole Good in Minneapolis. Noem insisted the Trump administration is committed to enforcing the law evenly, but the more she talked, the harder that claim was to believe. Noem repeatedly alleged that Good was, quote, breaking the law by impeding and obstructing a law enforcement operation. She went further, accusing Good of having, quote, weaponized her vehicle in what she called a, quote, act of domestic terrorism. Those are extraordinary accusations. They're all Noem's, and they were her immediate response the day of the shooting as well, ones that she's sticking to while the investigations are still ongoing. This moment during the CNN interview exposed the contradiction at the heart of her argument. Take a look.
Those are law enforcement officers being physically attacked. By this standard, would any of those officers be justified in shooting and killing the people causing them physical harm?
Every single situation is going to rely on the situation those officers are on. But they know that when people are putting hands on them, when they are using weapons against them, when they are physically harming them, that they have the authority to arrest those individuals.
She went on.
That's one thing that President Trump has been so focused on, is making sure that when we're out there, we don't pick and choose which situations are and which laws are enforced and which ones aren't.
So I was really trying to understand this word salad. Is Noem, who argues Renee Good was impeding law enforcement, also saying that the January 6th rioters who were caught on tape assaulting officers should have been arrested, but Renee Good deserved to be killed? Because that's what it sounds like when you line it up. And Jake Tapper did just that.
I just showed you video of people attacking law enforcement officers. Undisputed proof, undisputed evidence. And I just said President Trump pardoned all of them. And you said that President Trump is enforcing all the laws equally. It's just not true. There's a different standard for law enforcement officials being attacked if they're being attacked by Trump supporters. We just saw that.
Here was her response.
This individual and these instances and these investigations all have to be taken and done correctly in context of every situation that is happening on the ground.
And that's the point. Context matters, except it seems to matter selectively. According to Politico, even some inside the Trump administration are uneasy with how quickly officials labeled the shooting of Renee Good as domestic terrorism. Vice President J.D. Vance and Donald Trump repeated Noem's talking points, with Vance accusing the media of even lying last week. Politico reported Friday that some close to the administration fear the aggressive response, quote, risks undermining public confidence in the ongoing investigation. One administration official put it plainly, saying, quote, I don't know how we recover from this. They added, quote, this is highly problematic and not a good look and not something our government should be remotely engaged in. Here's where I land. If the party that brands itself as the party of law and order can't maintain consistent standards, the bare minimum would have been to allow the investigation to play out before publicly indicting Renee Good's character. An American citizen is dead, and that was never the stated goal of any immigration policy. Consistency, restraint, and accountability aren't political favors. They're actually the foundation of justice.
Yeah, so I agree with you that there was certainly a rush to judgment to describe her as committing an act of terrorism, a domestic terrorist. I think that was inappropriate from Kristi Noem. Again, because her motivations don't really matter anyway, just as the fact that, in my radar, I talked about how the liberals say, oh, but she was nice to him. Well, that doesn't matter either. But it also doesn't matter that, what her motivator, that she was obstructing traffic previously. What matters is whether he reasonably feared for his life. And there I would draw a distinction between that law enforcement, Jonathan Ross, and the situation he was in versus the J6 cops. Jake Tapper was trying to make that sound like that was some hypocrisy. What if they had opened fire on the J6 protesters? But the J6 protesters didn't, for the most part, confront the police with deadly force. A car is a dangerous, like you can hit someone in a car and kill them at a very, so that was the argument the officer is going to make is that was a threat to his life in the way that the protester, struggling with the police officer was not a threat to his life. Somebody in riot gear, someone who's armed, they're not armed, you're armed. It would be wrong for them to shoot you. Now, there might be some circumstance where it would be justified, where if they're being, pressed up against a wall or something, there was shoving in a mob,
a lot of video there.
things
in hand as well.
And it didn't happen. But if some police officer had shot one of those people, and then we would do a use of force authorization discussion, and it might have been permissible for them to do that. So it's not really, that wasn't quite, that didn't land for me.
Well, I thought it did because people did have objects in hand. It doesn't matter what they look at. It look at it as a threat to their life and obstructing justice. That's what essentially they're saying that Renee Good did. But separately, the response is the biggest part of this whole thing is that there's a lack of consistency. J.D. Vance went in front of the public and said immediately that this officer who killed Renee Good has this immunity that we're talking about. And the immunity that he's referencing usually is in regard to civil trials. And so any police officer or any law enforcement official that does anything that may be reviewed
qualified
in this way,
immunity is what you're talking about.
Exactly. He's saying, he basically is suggesting that as if he has complete and autonomous immunity. There's no laws in our books that say if a police officer egregiously violates the law that they have immunity. This is about civil trials. And so he's trying to convince the public that we shouldn't even be looking into this when in fact an investigation should and will prevail, and we definitely need to be
qualified immunity. Look, I don't love the idea of qualified immunity, but it does exist. You can't just I would be for reforming the system to limit qualified immunity.
And it's about civil trials.
You can't just
civil trials.
Sue the
Exactly.
right. You can't just if you've been mistreated by a government agent, you can't really sue that agent. You have to basically sue the government itself, which is very hard to do. So it's a kind of presumption that the individual agents of the state aren't going to face responsibility for things they've done wrong in a civil context if they've mistreated you. If they've murdered you, they're still going to face criminal.
And it doesn't protect you criminally. And so I think the fact that J.D. Vance kind of was elusive in his statement and made it seem like
I think he even said absolute. There's not absolute.
Yeah, absolutely. He was. That's what I mean. He was very forward. And these are the top leadership officials that are very closely connected to this investigation. And so when people are saying that they're afraid that there's transparency, it doesn't mean that Walz needs to be at the top of the investigation. It doesn't mean that the mayor needs
Walz
to be.
and Jacob Frey have prejudged the case just as much as Noem and J.D. Vance have. Jacob Frey said that it was self-defense was an expletive. There's no way.
I acknowledge that. That's why at the very least both parties need to have independent investigators, not just one side of that argument, right? If not, then just completely release both parties from it and allow an entire independent investigation to review this thing. Because how can you expect?
That's what Tom Homan said should happen.
And Tom Homan also, who is very pro-immigration reform, said we should pause before everybody last week. And it was quoted in The Hill that he was explaining that there should, I don't mind a moment of pause.
He's a professional lawman.
Exactly.
And when something like this happens, you shut up. You let
Why does no one else in the administration know that?
Shut up. Have an investigation so you don't, run your mouth and something you don't know what's going on. We all have gotten duped by little social media videos so many times. Doesn't just stop and let there be a process.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think a little bit of pause and just a regard to know that as many people wanted reform in our immigration policy and system that didn't like Joe Biden, I don't know that a lot of people wanted this, where we're even talking about one American citizen dying.
Certainly we're seeing a lot of videos now of ICE fighting with protesters in ways that I think are unprofessional for those individual officers. And I think that there could be a diminishing support for the agenda of the president with this kind of showy display of faux toughness. It turns me off. I don't know if it turns off people who voted for Trump en masse, but probably some of them. Lindsey, what's in your lens today?
Yep, let's get to it. So for decades, the EPA did something pretty simple and frankly essential. When it wrote clean air rules, it counted the lives those rules were expected to save. Fewer asthma attacks, fewer heart and lung diseases, fewer people dying too soon because of the air they breathe, making them sick. That wasn't politics. That was just the baseline for protecting public health. Now that math is changing. The New York Times first reported that under this administration, the EPA plans to stop assigning any dollar value to the health benefits of reducing two of the most dangerous air pollutants we face every single day. fine particulate matter, known as PM 2.5, and ozone. Instead, the agency will weigh only what those regulations cost in industry. That's not a technical tweak, that's a philosophical shift, and a consequential one. PM 2.5 particles are so small, they slip deep into the lungs and even into the bloodstream. Ozone forms smog. Long-term exposure to both is linked to asthma, heart disease, lung disease, and premature death. Research published in the European Respiratory shows that even moderate exposure to PM 2.5 can damage the lungs about as much as smoking cigarettes. This isn't abstract. This is science that we've known for years. Now, under the Biden administration, tighter PM 2.5 limits were projected to prevent up to 4,500 premature deaths and 290,000 lost workdays in a single year. For every dollar spent reducing pollution, the EPA estimated as much as $77 in health benefits. Sounds like a great thing, right? Well, the Trump administration argues those health estimates are too uncertain and that monetizing them creates, quote, false precision. But uncertainty has always existed. Different administrations have debated how much a human life is worth in cost-benefit analysis. What is new is that no administration before has treated that value as zero. As Richard Reves of NYU told The Times, the idea that the EPA would not consider the public health benefits of its regulation is an anathema to the very mission of the EPA. He went further. If you're only considering the costs to industry and you're ignoring the benefits, then you can't justify any regulations that protect public health, which is the very reason that the EPA was set up. The agency says it's still, quote, considering health impacts, just not monetizing them. But the reality is in Washington, when you don't put it on the balance sheet, it gets ignored. If only one side of the ledger has numbers attached, that side wins. This shift also makes it easier to roll back pollution limits on power plants, refineries, and factories, lowering costs for companies while almost certainly leading to dirtier air. And there's a legal irony here. James Goodwin, the co-executive director at the Center for Progressive Reform, noted that the move appeared to ignore the 2015 Supreme Court case Michigan versus the EPA. In the majority opinion, Justice Antonin Scalia wrote that if an agency considers the benefits of a regulation, it must also consider the costs, and vice versa. So essentially, taking lives off the ledger doesn't rebalance the scales, it breaks them. Now, I know you were happy when you saw, was it Bill Gates kind of moderated his stance on the environment? You were like, oh, we're not putting all our eggs in that basket of like, okay, we're killing the environment. I'm not also that person that thinks that everything has to do with climate change and the environment, but I don't think that we should. These numbers that we've been looking at under multiple administrations that have fluctuated have always told us how many pollutants are causing people to take sick days off, not coughing in the office, and then things like asthma, which I actually have, and it's not a big deal, but it's a bigger deal depending on where I am and how polluted the air is. And you also know that poorer communities end up with poorer circumstances. So for example, in a place where factories are, like a Beaumont, Texas, like they have tons of smoke coming from these factories in the air, oil refineries, and it's not regulated to the same degree. So then companies like ExxonMobil are just going to continue to flourish while we have no regulation. And so I don't know that this is the best idea. He said we're still looking at all the things, but not worried about how many lives it saves or how much money. And it's like we need to worry about all the things because the economy runs on money. People not showing up to work runs on money. The only people who worry about money are now how much these big companies that are putting pollutants in the air are benefiting. And I think we should do better than that.
Well, I would hope they would consider the impact in terms of harm or lives lost from polluted air, and also the impact of lives saved or improved by whatever product this factory is making. I mean, we need oil, we need things factories build. In fact, part of the big Trump administration push was to build more things here. I'm not for, I do not like the EPA. I think it
You don't like the entire EPA?
I would probably shut down the entire thing. But among the things it does that are more valuable and valid would be, so we need government, I'll meet you halfway. We need government management of truly public spaces that don't have a direct property owner, rivers, forests, the sky, the air. yeah, you need standards, you need government management for, yes, how much toxic fumes you can pump into the air. You're right. That is going to be regulated because that's a space that's not specifically owned by one person. The rivers like that too, the lakes, the oceans, etc. We need some government management. I do concede that. I think the EPA tends to overemphasize those kinds of hard, and they also just make you do so much bureaucratic nonsense. Like, you're going to build a factory, they are going to let you do it, or a house or whatever you want to build, a road. They just want you to do an environmental impact report. They want you to spend years putting together this giant stack of papers where you consider the cost to the 10-footed sloth, and then you just have to make this report. It takes forever to do it, and then it proceeds. Okay. So it's creating busy work. It's creating jobs for bureaucrats. And the fate of the 10-footed, what did I say, footed? I meant 10-toed. I made up this animal. The fate of the 10-toed sloth, it's kind of sad or whatever, but we got to kill all those sloths so that we can have, the sloth's life is not valuable enough.
We're not talking about sloths. We're talking about the fact that the administration does not want to calculate the effects to human life, right? They want to take that out of the calculation because they said it's not accurate. But every administration prior to this that's been engaging with the EPA in this way has calculated that. So if a new company comes, like you said, and has to create a report that might be some tedious work for them, won't take years. They probably have people to do that because they're about to stand to make millions or billions with this new factory.
Can't build anything.
Wait, let me say, they build the factory and then they have people working there and going to build the economy. But the EPA is simply asking, when you are using this much electricity, when you're infecting the environment, putting this much smoke in the air, how many people will you affect? And they would like to see that thoroughly so they can understand not just the 10-footed sloths or whatever you're talking about, real people, real little kids that have asthma, real people that are affected by the environment. How will you affect the community? It's not always about money and who you're going to employ. Like, if the community is deteriorating and can't have clean air or like clean water, for instance, which we've seen in recent history, unfortunately, in a lot of poorer communities, well, that's a problem. And we need to make sure that doesn't happen.
But poor communities are also not helped by nothing being built because of onerous environmental regulation. I mean, they tried to build some of the money federal government approved. This happened under Biden. It was voted for to build electric car charging stations all over the country. They built none of them. Zero. This is money. Congress voted for it, and President Biden signed it and said, we would like to build more of these environmental charging stations. This would be good for the economy. This is good for the environment because we want to move in this direction. And they can't build them. Even though they have appropriated the money to do it, the government has said, yes, build it, and it was voted for, and it would be good for the environment. And they can't do it. Why? Because it's too difficult. The process to build things is too tough because the red tape is exhaustive. And the environmental impact regulations is a big part of that. It's not the whole story, but getting rid of all of that, we would have to consider that just doing away with all of that would actually be better for the environment because we could build more electric.
And you'd have to walk around with a mask on, which I know you love because you hardly could breathe because of the chemicals.
I'm saying no, we would have a cleaner air because even clean, good, new things that can improve the environment, we can't build those because of the stupid sloth. Lindsey, what's in your lens today?
Let's talk about it. So 6 career federal prosecutors don't just walk away from their jobs lightly, especially not people who've spent decades inside the Justice Department handling some of the most complex fraud cases in the country. So when 6 prosecutors in Minnesota resign in a single day, there's a problem. At the center of this is the killing of Renee Nicole Good, a Minneapolis woman shot by an ICE agent. In moments like this, the expectation is straightforward. You investigate the use of deadly force transparently, independently, and with the goal of determining whether the law was followed. That's how trust is built. Instead, the Justice Department chose to forego a civil rights investigation into the shooting, and a decision that was so alarming that several career prosecutors in the Civil Rights Division in Washington resigned in protest. What replaced that investigation is where things get even more troubling. According to multiple reports, rather than fully examining whether the ICE agent's actions were lawful, senior Justice Department officials pushed to investigate Good's widow, Becca Good, probing her supposed ties to activist groups that monitor immigration enforcement. This is the move that Joseph H. Thomas, the acting U.S. attorney for Minnesota last year and a career prosecutor, reportedly objected to strenuously before he resigned. He also opposed the department's refusal to partner with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, the state agency that routinely investigates police shootings, a decision that senior officials overruled. Now, Becca Good, in a statement released last week, captured the imbalance of that moment in plain language, saying she and her wife, quote, stopped to support their neighbors. We had whistles, they had guns. But no matter what you think about her statement, a fair investigation is necessary in this matter. Drew Evans, the superintendent of the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, didn't mince words about what Thompson's departure means. He told the New York Times, quote, we're losing a true public servant. He went on to say we really need professional prosecutors, and warned that the absence of a credible investigation into Renee Good's killing stands to, quote, undermine trust in our public safety agencies. Now, all of this is unfolding as political rhetoric around Minnesota is being deliberately inflamed from the top. President Trump posted on Truth Social, quote, fear not, great people of Minnesota, the day of reckoning and retribution is coming. That message came as protests spread, as state and city leaders urged federal agents to leave Minneapolis, and as the administration continued to insist the ICE officer acted in self-defense, even as questions remain and facts are still contested. Yes, Minnesota has faced serious fraud cases, with many of the defendants charged in the cases being of Somali origin. More than 90 people have been charged in schemes involving social service programs. Yes, that is the reason the administration decided to send in ICE. But fraud investigations don't cancel out civil rights, and they don't justify redirecting the machinery of justice towards a grieving widow while sidestepping scrutiny of an officer who used lethal force. When seasoned prosecutors resign en masse, when civil rights lawyers walk away in protest, and when accountability is replaced with intimidation, the message isn't subtle. When justice is real, it doesn't pick sides, shield power, or shift scrutiny away from the hardest questions. It serves everyone equally, or it falls and fails the very purpose it claims to uphold.
Yeah, look, I think it was very regrettable that that order came to look into Renee Good's wife, and that prompted the resignations of people who were doing very solid work on bringing the fraudsters to justice. Look, you can think that the evidence, the video will demonstrate that the officer, Jonathan Ross, was justified in the moment in thinking the vehicle was coming at him, and thus he was justified in shooting. You can hold that view without saying that we've demonstrated that she's a domestic terrorist, or that we, for some reason, have to probe that background, in order to smear the person who got killed. I don't see what that accomplishes, and I think only the most fervent, frothing at the mouth, right-wing defenders of militarized police are interested in doing that. That's not most of us. Again, even if you think, as I am leaning toward, having processed and having listened to what people had to say, thinking that charges would not be appropriate, that in the moment he thought the vehicle was coming at him, and in hindsight he could have just gotten out of the way. Probably, I don't think she was trying to run him down, but I think it will be deemed justifiable. But we can leave it there. We don't need to smear her family and all that. And these investigators don't want to do that either. They want to remain laser focused
on the incident at hand.
What everyone says is important, which is bringing fraud, prosecuting fraud. So sometimes you do have to prioritize what you're caring about here, and this does reflect misplaced priorities to me. Take everybody off the fraud prosecution so they can dig up dirt on this, And
also, from what I understood, and I
ladies.
hate to kind of bring up even this activism link, because we have no hard evidence that this is in any relationship to Renee Good or Becca Good. But as I looked into the surrounding organizations that I saw, mostly conservative websites saying that they were a part of, these are organizations that were doing things like literally arming themselves with whistles And so then if they were part of this alleged organization, no, some of the instructions on the actual Instagram and Facebook pages linked to this organization were like, listen to orders, whistle to let people know they're in town. Nothing was saying obstruct justice or do anything. So the investigation, if you're looking into whether this is a civil issue or criminal issue, if the ICE agent went too far, then we need to pursue and see if he went too far or if she acted out of the wrong. I don't think we need to go into her wife and see if whistling was part of the problem to let people know in their neighborhood. Some of these people, if they're still talking about the same page, were around a school district, which Becca Good apparently lives nearby, and they're whistling because they're trying to let people know if you're dropping your kids off at school and don't want to be harassed today, you hear the whistles, maybe turn around. Because you might look like a migrant to someone, and so you might get harassed in front of your children, which will scar them forever.
Okay,
these are people that are allowed to be around. You said that they're allowed to be around, allowed to whistle, allowed to alert the community that ICE is there. This is not illegal things.
Right, but they're not allowed to obstruct what ICE is doing, to get in their way, to block the road in their cars, to use their cars in a threatening manner. And the wife, Becca Good, did say the final words we see on that tape are, flee, baby, flee, or whatever, run, baby, run. Instructing her to just drive off. That was a bad instruction that got her killed. So I don't know, did that idea just spring out of her head that the police are saying stop, and I'm telling this person that I'm my partner to drive away?
We don't know.
Is that part of the training? Is there an ICE protest group that is giving the instructions to people? Yeah, they're here illegitimately, so you don't have to listen to them, because that's bad advice. That was lethally wrong advice in this case. Say just drive off. She got her killed for that reason.
Now,
there's some moral blame there. It's not legal blame, but it's moral.
But isolating local officials out of this investigation, and now understanding that 6 prosecutors quit because what seems like they were being pushed in a certain direction to kind of find backup evidence for the claims of domestic terrorism that Kristi Noem preemptively made about Renee Good. I think that this is all problematic when people are trying to find the transparency in what happened. Some people are actually doing what you said from your lens 2 days ago and calming down and trying to see what happened here and look at the video and say, I'm not a federal prosecutor. Let me see what comes out of this. But when the federal prosecutors are quitting because they say they're being pushed in a direction that obviously seems biased, well, that's problematic, and exactly why people said at least let the local officials be part of this to oversee, because they have an entirely different opinion of you. If 2 persuaded opinions come together and figure out what happened, maybe that's more chance of some justice as opposed to one side that specifically already said how they feel about Renee Good and her wife.
Local officials assist in deportations in the first place, and then we wouldn't have ICE having to patrol communities. That's a point I see a lot of conservatives raise, that the reason you have this, very showy and very inconvenient ICE presence in these places is because they have sanctuary city policies, and the local cops are not going to participate, don't help. That's why these kinds of things aren't taking place in red states, because the local police will just help apprehend illegal immigrants. That's the difference.
We're going to talk about this a lot more.
Lindsay, what's in your lens today?
Yeah, so the White House is facing a new cascade of criticism, with regional Fed officials now pushing back on the criminal inquiry into Fed Chair Jerome Powell. The Federal Reserve is supposed to operate independently, insulated from political pressure, so it can make tough, often unpopular decisions to keep inflation in check. That independence is now being tested in a really public way. Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee didn't mince words when he told NPR yesterday, quote, "I consider Chair Powell to be a first ballot Hall of Fame Fed chair. If we're going to get into a circumstance where the independence or even the integrity of Chair Powell is in question, we're in a bad spot." That's not partisan rhetoric. That's an economic warning. This comes as the Justice Department investigates Powell's congressional testimony related to the Fed's costly headquarters renovation, a probe many economists, CEOs, and even Republican lawmakers see as political pressure disguised as oversight. Now, Minneapolis Fed President Neil Kashkari has said the escalation of the attacks is really about monetary policy, not construction costs. And New York Fed President John Williams emphasized that Powell is a, quote, man of impeccable integrity, warning that interference could lead to higher inflation. Now, at the same time, President Trump is openly frustrated that interest rates are not being cut fast enough. Instead of waiting on the Fed, he's trying to find ways around it. In recent days, Trump ordered Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to buy $200 billion in mortgage-backed securities, a move designed to push mortgage rates down. Axios reports it worked, at least temporarily, sending rates below 6% for the first time since 2023. He's also calling for a one-year cap on credit card interest rates at 10%, though it's unclear whether banks would comply without official legislation. Now, on the surface, cheaper borrowing sounds really great. Who wouldn't want lower mortgage payments or less credit card interest? But economics is rarely that simple. Artificially lowering rates without addressing supply, especially in housing, can backfire. We've seen this before. In 2021, low rates helped fuel bidding wars. I was part of one of them. Drove home prices higher and higher and left affordability worse, not better. What we're watching right now is a tug-of-war between short-term political wins to help Republicans in the midterms and long-term economic stability. Undercutting the Fed may feel like relief in the moment, but history shows it can lead to higher inflation, market instability, and deeper pain for us all down the road. Bottom line, when leaders start pressuring the referee instead of respecting the rules of the game, the entire system gets riskier, and everyday Americans are usually the ones that pay the price.
Incredible. I agree completely.
Incredible? Oh,
no, I have not a single word of criticism.
I
totally agree.
I think this is significant.
Low interest rates cause boom and bust cycles. That's part of Austrian economics. The manipulation, devaluation of our currency is all downstream of that. Encouraging the government, encouraging reckless borrowing is the cause of great economic instability, great panics in the market that have arisen historically. That's absolutely true. And if for political reasons they lower interest rates to appease the president, there's going to be no end to that. Future Democrats could do the same thing. That's bad. We do not want that.
And if we just look at the wave from 2021, it seemed like if you were lucky enough to be working and not, gravely or deeply affected by the pandemic, there were a lot of people that had the money at the time to try to buy properties, and there were low interest rates. I mean, ours was like in the 2-3%, which is unseen. I mean, I talk to people that are 80 years old that are like, that's crazy. My whole lifetime, I haven't seen that. But when you see that bubble and the pricing that I was talking about burst, now we're in a situation 5 years later where people have felt like the economy has been absolute garbage for the last 3 years or more. And I think if we play with that too much and we go into the midterms and people feel like there's some relief that the president has promised, then they have 3 years past that when there's a new president and another failing economy. I think people want to look for long-term stability in our economy and figure that out. And when you have the Fed chairs that are, like you said, nothing might be independent in your eyes fully, but they've always operated in a space where if they made an uncomfortable decision, they didn't feel like they were going to be berated or lose their job at any point. They just had to make the call. They were autonomous. So even if they had a political affiliation or more of a friend on one side, they still made autonomous decisions based on numbers and the economy. And I think when you see all these different Fed leaders that are from all over the country speaking out in unison, putting out a public statement, every single living Fed chair that's had Jerome Powell's job signed a statement and put it out to say this is wrong. And I'm sure they served and have different political affiliations. I think the president has to wake up and say, what policies can I look at outside of harassing the Fed and outside of policies that most of my party doesn't agree with to try to make it more affordable in the U.S. And maybe the first place to start, and I know I can just tee you up for this one, is the tariffs. Maybe that could be the first place to start, because I think that there are other things that he can be looking at, or just not pay so much attention to every other thing on his list to do, like pursuing Dr. Fauci. It's time to really focus on, and I know he's not doing that, but you want him to.
Fight.
No, he wants to. I'm saying
Dr. Fauci.
He shouldn't do that. And people are tweeting me. I told you I'm never on Twitter. I don't.
Economy.
No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. He should not waste the time.
Well, because the economy was great until COVID destroyed it.
And that was Dr. Fauci's fault.
It was created in a lab by
I wanted to make sure I heard
and
you
research
correctly.
funded by Dr. Fauci. So that's why it's important that we don't do that again. But
So him being in jail will fix the economy mostly for us?
we'll send a message to future Dr. Frankensteins not to do this reckless experimentation on live viruses that kills millions of people. I think that's important, but that's just me. Having a good economy is not rocket science. It's very easy. First of all, lower taxes, get rid of every regulation you possibly can, don't do tariffs at all, and cut government spending, fire government employees. Get rid of red tape so we can have as much housing as possible. We want to make it as easy to start a business and employ people, even if they're immigrants. You've got to have policies for high-skilled immigrants to come in. Do all of that. The economy will hum and buzz like a beautiful mechanical butterfly. I don't know. Bull. I was like doing a bee, like a bumblebee.
Okay, I think you sound like Elon Musk.
Am I high today?
I hope not. You sound like Elon Musk, who had all these pipe dreams about what he could do if he comes in with a businessman mindset for our government structure and our economy. And as you saw, and we all saw, he's still a great businessman, but he left the government with his tail tucked a bit. A lot of people that he fired got rehired. A lot of the billions that he mentioned to cut, people have refuted those claims in a variety of ways, saying it's like a fraction of what he actually says he cut. So the ideas are very pie in the sky, but like, what's the realistic way? You're like, just get rid of this, fire all government employees. Okay, well, Elon Musk tried that. It was a fail. So what else then?
It's like Sauron or Voldemort. You think it's dead, but it exists still in its spectral, smoky form and can never properly be totally destroyed. It resurfaces government employment.
And so you just think we should have nothing, just Supreme Court and the president and call it a, because you already hate Congress. Now you hate...
Fire a lot of government employees.
Have like 5 people
End a lot
left.
of benefits, privatize Social Security, cut Medicare, Medicaid. We got to do all that.
Okay, our system is going to run ragged with no type of health coverage. Everyone's still going to go. I mean, well, there's people that still have no money that are going to go to the hospital still, and who's paying for all that stuff?
People with no money, we need a little
out
bit
of
of
jobs
state for them, but people with tons of money, maybe they can pay for it themselves.
Lindsey, what's in your lens?
Let's talk about it. So right now, Minnesota feels a little bit like a pressure cooker. And what's happening there is bigger than just one city, one governor, or one president. I think it's a snapshot of what happens when immigration becomes a political weapon instead of a policy problem that demands grown-up solutions. So Governor Tim Walz tried to lower the temperature as tensions escalated in Minneapolis, urging protesters to remain peaceful and asking President Trump to step back from threatening to deploy the U.S. military. He took to X with this appeal, writing in part, quote, "I am making a direct appeal to the president. Let's turn down the temperature. Stop this campaign of retribution. This is not who we are." That's not too radical language. That's a governor trying to prevent a bad situation from becoming worse. But the backdrop matters here. Minneapolis has seen aggressive, large-scale federal immigration enforcement actions, protests, and now 2 federal agent-involved shootings in just 1 week. 1 American citizen, as you all know, is dead. In response, President Trump floated Invoking the Insurrection Act, a dramatic escalation that would give federal troops expanded authority over law enforcement inside the state. This goes far beyond Title X, which allows the National Guard to support local law enforcement. The Insurrection Act is a sledgehammer, not a scalpel. Mayor Jacob Fry also pushed back, warning against further escalation. He wrote on X, quote, "Minnesota needs ICE immigration and customs enforcement to leave, not an escalation that brings additional federal troops beyond 3,000 already here. My priority is keeping local law enforcement focused on public safety, not diverted by federal overreach." Again, that's a local leader saying more force isn't the same as more safety. A CNN poll backs that up, released on Wednesday. It found that 51% of Americans believe the presence of ICE officers in cities across the U.S. has made people, quote, less safe. The White House has accused Walz, Fry, and other Democrats of inflaming tensions. In a statement to The Hill, spokesperson Abigail Jackson said, quote, "Tim Walz, Jacob Fry, and Democrat leaders in Minnesota have done nothing but turn up the temperature, smear heroic ICE officers, and incite violence against them, all in defense of criminal illegal aliens." Now, this back and forth reduces what was a complex policy failure into villains and slogans, while the chaos on the ground is just still continuing. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Both sides have helped get us here. Republicans blame Democrats for the migrant crisis, pointing to Biden's policies and sanctuary cities. Democrats argue Republicans exploit immigration politically, sabotage bipartisan solutions like the 2024 border bill, and rely on rhetoric that's rooted more in fear than facts. What's missing is the urgency around actual legislation. Even voices in Trump's own orbit have been signaling concern. Joe Rogan, for example, who voted for Trump, has openly said he feels like this is going too far.
And then I can also see the point of view of the people that say, yeah, but you don't want militarized people in the streets just roaming around, snatching people up, many of which turn out to actually be U.S. citizens that just don't have their papers on them. Are we really going to be the Gestapo? Where's your papers? Is that what we've come to?
CNN's Abby Phillip asked the most basic, necessary question. If this crisis is truly that serious, why isn't Congress legislating instead of escalating?
They control the House, the Senate, and the White House. And they have a Supreme Court that is in their favor. So why is it, explain to me, 12 months of Donald Trump, no legislation whatsoever on immigration?
At some point, someone has to be the adult in the room. We're past the blame game. We're here now with real people, real communities, and real risk. If lawmakers across the spectrum are serious about safety, order, and humanity, then de-escalation and workable immigration legislation aren't optional. They're the only way out of this chaos.
All right, lots to potentially discuss here.
Yeah.
I guess let's start with the legislative aspect of this, because one thing that I've been curious about is there obviously have been a lack of conversations between Democrats and Republicans on the Hill in terms of a potential legislative quote-unquote fix to the immigration issue. But I'm curious about what the specifics are that people are looking for on immigration legislation. Is it amnesty? Is it more border security? What specifically do people want Republicans to do that Trump is not?
Well, I think the fact that Trump is making decisions that are the conversations start with some friction with these Democratic mayors. And then he's just like, well, I'm doing this because it's within my rights to send ICE there. To me, that's not a solution that's going to just go and not get any pushback. So if Congress does look at this and say, okay, we didn't pass the bill in 2024 that people thought would do many different things, not what the president's doing right now, closing the border and some other things, they should sit down and talk about what solutions Congress wants to work for. So that requires the people that are voted into office to go talk to their constituents and see what immigration reform they wanted. If we talk about polls from the election season in 2024, you'll remember a lot of people agreed that Biden dropped the ball with immigration. A lot of people agreed that they wanted some kind of reform. So it really wouldn't be only through my lens about what perspective I would want to see done. But I think the entire country was on the similar page. They want to see something done. But now there are voices that voted for Trump and were adamant in getting him elected and really catalysts for it that are criticizing they didn't want this done. So it's really up to all American people that feel so, I guess, overwhelmed by the action happening right now to talk to their local officials and say, here's what we want to see happen in Congress, because nothing's being done. And really, sometimes it requires all these leaders proposing ideas and really sitting down and doing their jobs in Congress and coming to us, the American people, with a bipartisan solution, since the 2024 proposal was not it for people. And I really thought that the Trump administration was going to move forward and push through a new legislation when he got in office. But that didn't happen. I thought that would be immediate because he had reportedly told a lot of congressional members not to vote for that legislation. So I thought the first thing on his agenda, outside of just sending ICE to cities, would be to get something on the books.
Yeah, one of the first bill that Congress did pass when Trump took office was the Laken-Riley Act, which basically made it easier for illegal aliens with criminal histories to be detained and deported, but not, I guess, the comprehensive immigration legislation that some people were looking for. On the Insurrection Act, I do think, it's important to look at what that is actually meant to do, which is it gives the federal government the ability to send in the National Guard in situations where there is unlawful obstruction or rebellion. And what we've been seeing in Minneapolis, both before and after the death of Renee Good, was mass protests, but not just people filming ICE or watching or protesting, but actually getting involved in the situation and obstructing law enforcement proceedings. There are groups like Minnesota ICE Watch that actually encourage people to try to pry suspects out of ICE's custody, to use their vehicles to block ICE's movement. And in the aftermath of the death of Renee Good, there were actually riots taking place in Minneapolis where people were breaking into law enforcement vehicles, stealing weapons, graffitiing the vehicles, stealing personal information of ICE agents. And so I'm actually wondering where the line is for Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act, because I think we're actually past due for that moment.
Well, I think that the Democratic leadership in Minnesota and Minneapolis have now been saying, let's bring the temperature down. So my bigger point outside of what he can do next is like, hopefully the best next step is to get everybody at least in conversation to figure out what the long-term solution is. So even if National Guard comes, that's not a long-term solution. I just like to see adults at the table because no one wants to see this happening in Minnesota.